Okay, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. We are toward the bottom of Nun Amud Beis, and if you recall, we're in the middle of a sugya comparing and contrasting Hekesh Gzeir Shava Kal V'chomer and Binyan Av. If you start with one, can you then continue that one with a different one? We've learned 11 out of the 16 permutations, and right now we're about to learn the 12th. We're about 10 lines or so from the bottom of Nun Amud Beis and Zevachim. Let us continue. Davar halamid bekal v'chomer, mahu sheyalamid bebinyanav. If your starting point is a kal v'chomer, can I then take that starting point of a kal v'chomer and extend what I'm learning with a binyanav? Amr b'yirmiyah tashma. Let's see. We have a brisa. This is talking about malika and whether or not malika, which is the Kohen using his long thumbnail, which was used to kill the bird in the Beis HaMikdash, to kill a bird with malika outside of the Beis HaMikdash would render the animal an avela. To kill a bird in the Beis HaMikdash with malika is givaldik. That's what you're supposed to do. But what we want to know is if you do malika, would the animal, if the animal was found to be a treifa, what would be the halacha? So let's learn about this. Sounds like we're coming out of left field, but we'll see how all of this develops. I was talking to Rabbi Avram Shimon Muller at work today. He said, I love these Gemaras. They're my favorite Gemaras in Shas. And I'm like, that's because nobody's as smart as you are. What are you talking about? Like, this is everybody's nightmare Gemaras. It's like the second we see the words like klal, prat, klal, we're like, everybody gets nervous. He's like, these are my favorite Gemaras in Shas. I'm like, come to Daf Yomi today, you can teach for me. So let's see the din. Toshma. We have a brisa that can be found in later on in this Masechta, another 19 blot. Malak v'nimtzeis treifa. Let's say the Kohen does malika. He takes the nail and he kills the bird through the back of the neck, and the animal turns out to be a treifa. Rav Meir Omer einu mitama b'veis habliya. Pashat, it's usher to eat, but he says that you remove the tuma. There's no tuma to eat that food. It will not be mitame. Again, it's still nisr deraisa to eat it. The animal's a treifa. You can't eat it. But there's no tuma. We didn't say usher and mutter. We said tame and not tame. So Reb Meir says einu matama b'beis havliya. Reb Yehuda Omer, no, it is matama b'beis havliya. And Omer Reb Meir, I want to give you a kal v'chomer. Let me tell you why I think that a malika that was done on an animal that turned out to be a treifa, why it is that it's not matame b'beis havliya. Uma nevelas behema shematama b'magu v'masa. When it comes to let's say a cow that is a nevela is metame b'magum uvamasa. If you carry it, it makes you tame. Posh it if you swallow it. But even if you carry it, and there by that cow, shchitasim etaheres treifasim itumasa, that if we do shchita, it removes the tuma of the nevela by a cow. So then nevelas ov she'ein metama b'magu v'masa, then the nevela of an ov, which even under the worst of circumstances is not matama b'magu v'masa, eino din shetei shchitasim etaheres treifasim itumasa, pasha, that shchita would be metaher, that bird, if you did shchita on that bird, it should also remove the tuma. Beautiful kal v'chomer. I'll say it outside. If by a behema, where if it wasn't available, it's matame b'maga uvamasa, shchita ruins that tuma, and now it's still usher to eat, but it's just not matame. Then a bird that was never matame b'maga uvamasa, pashat shchita would help. So that is our starting kal v'chomer. It's not our starting kal v'chomer. We'll see soon. That's our starting kal v'chomer. And then look at the next line. Mamatzinu. What does that teach me? That's a binyanav. We see that by a bird, turning to the top of Manala, we see that by a bird, that if you do shchita, it's machshir for achila, and it's mitaheres treifasa mitumasa. What?
It's not in the chart, Mamatzinu.
Mamatzinu is the equivalent of saying binyanav. Just like we found over here that the halacha is X, so too everywhere the halacha is X. It's just another phraseology. You're correct. It's not the same syntax, not the same words, but a mematzinu is meant to refer to a binyana. So mematzinu, we're going to take what we learned. We had a kal v'chomer, and we learned that if it's true by a behema that shchita is machshir it from the tuma, for sure it's true by shchita of a bird. And now we're going to show that from the kal v'chomer, I'm going to use a binyanav to teach me that it's true by malika also. And this is Rav Meir's. This is going to be Rav Meir's argument. And mematzinu b'shchita shemechsharta b'achilim metaharis treifasa mitumasa. And just like shchita can be metahir, Af malika shemachsharta be'achila tetar trefasa mitumasa. So we have a double. Here, just follow along in the abstract. This is what's happening over here. Beautiful kal v'chomer that teaches me that if it's true that shchita by a behema can take an animal and remove its status of tuma, kal v'chomer, of course it can do the same for a bird that is a lesser status, that's pashut. So what does the kal v'chomer teach me? That just like shchita removes tuma, so too shchita does remove tuma by a bird. We still don't know about Malika. That's learned in the Mematzinu. So we have a Kal V'chomer followed by a Mematzinu. So what was our question? Can you do that? According to the Gemara, according to Rav Meir, the answer is yes, absolutely you can. And then on the top of Nun Aleph, Amud Aleph, 3 lines down, we see a dissenting opinion. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Daya kinvelas behema tahora, sheshchitasa mitaharta velo malikasa. I agree with you that the shchita would work. I just don't agree with your mematzinu. Now this doesn't really argue on the principle of our Gemara as to whether or not we're allowed to have a mematzinu after a kal v'chomer, but it's just an argument against Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi was the middle shita. He was the middle of the road. He said, you're right, I agree that the shchita, if you do shchita on a bird, that it would remove tumah. But mehecha tesi, that your mematzinu is right. How do you know that it would also be true by malika? That if you do malika, it would then remove the status of tumah. So that was what he argued. So therefore, what do we see from here, primarily from the shita of Reb Meir? What we see from Reb Meir is that there can be a kal v'chomer that's followed by a binyan or a mematzinu. Says the Gemara, Velohi Hasam. It's actually not like that over there. This is a very weird language. I would have thought without looking at Rashi, Velohi Hasam Tehavehi. That's how I would have learned it. So let's take a look at Rashi. Dibra Maschil Velohi Hasam Tehave Mishchita Duchul Yakasya V'hachi Perusho. Rashi says, I know this one's a tough one. So Rashi explains as follows. Top Rashi on Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. Hachi Perusho Hasam over there. Iker Taimader of Meir lo yalif bebinyanav. You thought that we extended from shchita to malika through a binyanav. It's not true. Elame hekesh. It's actually learned from a hekesh. Dezos Torah sabehema ve'aof kitalakaman beperkchata saof. Amrina Rav Meir kra ashkach v'darash. So over there on Daf Samachtes, really when Rav Meir said that we know that the din of malika works, Rav Meir still holds that way. But it wasn't learned from a hekesh. I'm sorry, it wasn't learned from a mematzin, it was learned from a hekesh. All of that is answer number one. So when the Gemara says, Velohi Hasam, you learn the Gemara wrong over there. The Gemara over there is not talking about a binyanab, it's talking about a hekesh. Rashi continues, V'inami tehave. Oh, and another answer is, and now let's go back in the Gemara. So first answer is Velohi Hasam. Second answer is tehavihi mishchita d'chulin ka'asyan. Another possible answer to all of this is that the case that we were dealing with wasn't talking about Kachim at all, it was talking about Chulin. And as we've spoken about 3 or 4 times, this whole discussion that we've been having since the bottom of Mem Tessim and Beis, by the parentheses, by the Hekesh and Gzeir Shava and Kal V'chomer and Binyanab, we're only talking about Kachim. The example that he gave wasn't about Kachim, so therefore there's no Raya. Either way, we reject that possibility and we don't have a real clarity on whether or not we're allowed to have a Binyanab that follows a Kal V'chomer. Now let's move on to the fourth one. The Gemara decided to be nice to us and combine all 4 into one. The Gemara says, "Davar halamid bebinyanav, ma'ushe lamed behekash v'gzer shava v'kal v'chomer bebinyanav." This was unlike the previous structure of the Gemara, where every permutation was listed separately. So this is answering up for boxes 13, 14, 15, 16, which is everything under the bracket of binyanav. If I start with the binyanav, can I then extend it through hekesh gzer shava kal v'chomer binyanav? Pshot meha chado. We could at least learn one answer. Mipnei ma amru lon bedam kosher. How do we know that if dam is lon, if blood stays out past shkia, that you can still put it on the mizbeach? Share lon be'emurin kosher. The reason why is because if you left out the emurin overnight and put it on the mizbeach, you wouldn't have to take it down. So that we also learn. From the world of emurin. And lan be'emurin kosher, how do we know that's true? Shari lan be'basar kosher, because if there was extra meat that was left over, so therefore it would still be kosher. So we learn basar to emurin and emurin to dam. So we see that we have a binyanav that learns from a binyanav. So that part's clear. We're going to continue the brayso, even though we have the information that we need. Yotze, if the meat was taken out of the Beis Hamikdash, taken out of the Azara, and then put up on the Mizbeach, hol v'yotze kasher b'bama. Since we know that sometimes a bama is allowed, and that's outside of the Mikdash, and that can go on the bama, so too we allow meat that came outside of the outside of the azara, that it can still be put up on the mizbeach and it'll still be kosher. What about meat that's tamei? Ho v'hutar ba'avodas tzibor, because we have the korban pesach, when we have a scenario of hutra, of tuma hutra b'tzibor, when 51% of the tzibor is going to be tamei, we still allow an animal that's tamei to be put up. So therefore, we allow this too. Chutz lizmano, if we have a case of pigul where someone had kavana that the shchita or zrika or one of the steps was to be done chutz lezman ahol miratza lepigulo. If it goes up on the base on the mizbeach, we don't take it down. And chutz lemekomo, how do we know about that? Well, chutz lemekomo is always possible, but not chayav kores. Hol v'hukash lechutz lezmano. The Gemara then adds another case. Shekiblu psulin v'zarku daman. What about a case where the person who received the blood was a pasul, or v'zarku daman, the person who did the zrika was pasul? Behanach psulin d'chazul avodas tzibor. We know that the kohanim, even if they were tamei, they're still allowed to do the avodah because tumah tzibor by a korban pesach. So says the Gemara, but all of this is on a house of cards. After all, you're trying to learn everything, and not very clear from the Gemara how this is learned out. But what's going on over here, as the Gemara points out, is how can you learn something that is not behechshero from something that is behechshero? What this means is we learned about the emurim of a shlamim. The reason why you can't learn from the emurim of a shlamim is because the shlamim is allowed to be eaten the next day. You're right, the emurim should have been put back up, maskim, but you're learning about emurim from shlamim to a case that has nothing to do with a shlamim. The shlamim's mutter, that's why the emurim are mutter. You can't learn about all cases of dam that are lun. That only applies by the shlamim. So the Gemara says, Tana, mezos Torah sa'ola riba samechle. We have a lot of inclusions that we're allowed to make because of the fact that the pasuk says mezos Torah sa'ola. And we can therefore extend dinim that are not only behechshero, talking about shlamim, but even in that our cases shelo behechshero, we would also include, which means any dam that is lun, that is left out pashgia, can still be put up on top of the mizbeach. That ends this sugya. I know you're all sad, but just to review, we learned about these 4 permutations of drashas, of hekesh, gzer shava, kal v'chomer, and binyanab, and then we cross-reference them with whether or not we could double up on them with either hekesh, binyanav, gzer shava, kal v'chomer, binyanav, 16 boxes. We answered up all of them. Some are more clear than others. Some are left with question marks. That brings us to the 2 dots halfway down on Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, where the Gemara says shiur hadam. And there the din is that we share them al yesod mizbeach, that we put it on the western wall of the mizbeach. So I'm just going to kind of build a little bit of a visual for you. This building right here to my left is the Heichal. This is the doorway into the Heichal. You go in, you get to the Heichal. At the back of the Heichal is the Kodesh HaKodashim. Right outside the Heichal, 11 amos, and then you have the Mizbeach. This side of the Mizbeach, the one that's closest to the Heichal, is the western wall of the Mizbeach. On the western wall and on the northern wall, there was an Amma, Saviv LaMizbeach. And the way that it worked is the whole western wall, the whole northern wall had an Amma, and a little bit wrapped around on the other 2 walls, the eastern and southern walls, there also was a little bit of the yesod that was there. So the Gemara wants to know, my time, why is it that we have to put the blood on the western wall of the mizbech, the one that's closest to the heichal? So Amar Kral, yesod mizbach haolah asher pesach ol moed hahu de paga beresha. Which wall do you bump into first when you walk out of the heichal? Pashat, it's the west wall, because this way is west. You're walking in from the east to the west, and the heichal is going to be right here. You can walk into the heichal. The mizbeach's here, so the first wall you see is right here. See, if you're doing a korban inside the panim or the lifnim, whichever one you're doing, if you then have to come out, you take the shiur hadam and you pour it on the yesod on the westmost side of the mizbeach, which is the wall that's closest to the heichal. Rashi has a different drasha here, but not for now. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have taught us in a brisa. We're going to see the same pasuk 3 times. One of them is, and you can look at the psukim on the side in Vayikra Perek Daled Zayin. Another one's Vayikra Daled Yud Ches. Another is Vayikra Daled Chav Hey. So sometimes if you're like even a quasi balkore, like your brain, like we're so used to these words, El Yisod Mizbacha Olah. So the Gemara wants to know, why does it say it 3 times? So we're not going to read all the psukim inside, but we're gonna be able to do these drashas. It says the Gemara halfway down in the brisa, El Yisod Mizbach Ola V'lo Yisod Mizbach HaPnimi. So one of these 3 phrases of El Yisod Mizbach Ola teaches us that we don't pour blood on the base of the Mizbach HaPnimi. There's no shiur hadam there. That's rule number one. We don't pour there. What about the next pasuk? El yesod mizbach ha'olah, ein lo yesod lepnimi atzmo. There isn't even a yesod around the inner mizbeach. The only place there is a yesod in the Beis Hamikdash is on the mizbeach hachitzon. On the inner mizbeach, the second drasha teaches us that there is no yesod. No, there wasn't even part of the architectural plans. And then lastly, al yesod mizbach ha'olah. What does the third pasuk teach us? Tain yesod lemizbeach shel olah, that every animal has to give its shiur hadam to the yesod of the mizbach ha'olah. It's called the mizbach ha'olah, the mizbech for the olah. But any animal that goes up there, the shiur hadam have to be poured over or at the yesod. Now the Brisa is going to analyze this within the Brisa still. Oh, einu ela mizbecha shel ola yehel yesod. Maybe we're learning some of these psukim wrong. Maybe really what the pasuk means is not like we just said in the last drush of tein yesod the mizbach shel ola, but only to teach us that the ola itself needs to have shiur hadam poured on the yesod. Maybe not everybody else. Amar Rabbi Shmuel kal v'chomer. I'll tell you why you're wrong. That's not true. Ma shirayim she'ein mechapren tu'unin yesod. When it comes to the shirayim, the blood is after the zrika. Shirayim is always after the fact, and it's not mechaper, yet it still needs a yesod. Tchilas ola, the beginning part of an ola, namely, when you do the zrikas hadam of an ola, which is shemechaperes, eino din shetu'una yesod, pasha that you're going to have an ola that's going to be part of a yesod, but shirayim, there's no kapara by shirayim. We've spoken about this before. What kapara do you get from a korban ola? That is the kapara of a mitzvah saseh that you don't do, or a lavanita klaseh. There are some collections of yisurim that are covered by an ola. So if by shirayim, which there is no kapara, requires yisod, obviously other korbanos that do have it are going to require. So therefore, you can't say what you said, that the drush is only about an ola. It's all animals. All animals. There's no kapara by shirayim. So pasha by the shirayim, you need to bring it. Now, Amar Rabbi Akiva, and this we're not going to understand until the end of the day, because what Rabbi Akiva wrote is almost identical to what Rabbi Shmuel wrote. He also gives a kal v'chomer. We will not understand, just forewarning, it's almost identical. I compared it and I'll call out the language that's different. We're 7 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Shmuel just gave us a kal v'chomer that shirayim is not mechaper and therefore ola is, so for sure it needs to be on the yesod. Amar Rabbi Akiva, ma shirayim she'ein mechaperin, and here are the added words of Rabbi Akiva, ve'ein boin lechapara, and they're not even being brought for that purpose. And then to unin yesod, tchilas ola shemechaperes, uva lechapara, and that taka does come for the sake of kapara. Eino din shetunin yesod. These are two answers that are really just one and the same. At least they sound very similar. And by the end of the day today, we'll learn a nafkamina between the two shitas. But that is what the Gemara says, these two different kal v'chomers that are very, very similar. And therefore, no, you can't say that one of the psukim of El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah is talking about only an Olah, but rather it has to be everything because of the svaras of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Imkain, because of the fact that that's true, that this kal v'chomer is so strong, it must therefore be ma'atam lomer al yesod mizbach olam. It must be like we said earlier in the brisa on the third drush of el yesod mizbach olah, tein yesod mizbecha shel olah, that the third drasha teaches us that all animals that go up on the mizbecha shel olah need to have their dam, the shirayim, poured on the yesod. End of the brisa. Now let's analyze the brisa. But before we do that, I just want to step back out so we don't lose the bigger picture. This brisa quotes the pasuk of El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah 3 times. And the first one teaches us that we don't ever pour by the Yesod of the Mizbeach HaPnimi. The second one teaches us is that there is no Yesod of the Mizbeach HaPnimi. And the third one teaches us that that all animals have to pour their shiraim on the Yesod, not just the Olah. And so what we're going to do now is we analyze the brisa from within the brisa, the Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel piece. But here the Gemara is now stepping out of the brisa and saying Omar Mar, 3 lines from the bottom, Nun Aleph Amar Aleph. Omar Mar El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah, should have that extra word. And we said Velo Yesod Mizbeach HaPnimi. So says the Gemara that pasuk is not available for the drasha that you just said. The first pasuk that we just said, we wanted to say that the drasha was to teach us that we don't pour dam shiur hadam by the pnim, by the mizbeach hapnimi. That can't be hamiboyle legufe. That pasuk of the first pasuk, which was written by Parko and Mashiach, we need that to teach that the shiur hadam goes to the yesod. You can't learn an external rule about the Mizbeach HaPnimi. All that pasuk was teaching is that the shiur adam have to be nishbach by the yisod hachitzon. You can't learn. We don't have enough words to learn out something extra at that point. So says the Gemara, don't worry, we actually do have enough words because that pasuk continues. Me'asher pesach ohel moed nafka, the one that is by the Pesach of the Ohel Moed. What's the Pesach of the Ohel Moed? When you get out of the Ulam, where does that go? The Yisod, Mizbeach HaChitzon. So because there's extra words, we can learn two things. The first thing we learn is what the Brisa first taught us halfway down or a little bit more, that when the Pasuk says by Par Kohen Mashiach, that when the Pasuk says Al Yisod Mizbeach HaOlah, it teaches us that that blood should not be poured on the inner Mizbeach. And the second part of the pasuk of Asher Pesach Ol Moed teaches us that extra din of Amibayle Legufe. So each part of the pasuk teaches us one thing. Then the Gemara says, well, the next part of the brisa was another pasuk that was similar, and that was Al Yisod Mizvach HaOlam, turning to the top of Nun Aleph Amud Beis. Yes, the Gemara is short. Does anybody want to learn Tosfos with me? Yeah, just how much time do you have? Yeah. Well, if you're right behind me, then we're not learning Tosos. So the Gemara is what?
Finish it definitely.
Oh, well, yeah. Baruch Hashem. Well, hopefully we'll learn about halfway down, just so we can get a little bit more distance, and then we'll pause. So it says the Gemara on the top of Nun Aleph Amud Beis that the second drasha said Tain Yisod. Sorry, this is the third drasha of Tain Yisod Mizbeach Shel Ola that taught us that all animals that are brought on the Mizbeach Shel Ola, that they all require to have the Shiare Hadam brought to the Yisod. Says the Gemara, the Isal Kedaita Kedichsiv. If you want it to be like the pasuk says, it has to be that this is the case. Halam alikra. The Gemara here, the language here is actually not correct in the Gemara. If you look on the side, I'll just read it for you over here. I don't know if you have it. It says lama kedichsiv hani lama li l'shirayim habiroi, and we remove the words kra and shirayim. So hani lama li. What is it? Hani lamali l'shirayim habiroi avilei. So says the Gemara, this is about the sa'ir of the nasi, and that was done on the chitzon. So why would you ever assume that it was ever anywhere else other than the mizbeach hachitzon? Of course, it was on the mizbeach hachitzon because habiroi avilahu. If you do a korban outside the mizbeach, why would you go inside to pour a pasuk? You're not going to do that. Obviously, why do you need a pasuk to tell me that? This pasuk was talking about a korban of the nasi that was done on the chitzon. You're not going to go into the heichal in order to pour the blood. That makes no sense. The chitema says the Gemara, the apich meipach. Maybe we should invert that divroi legavoy ugvoi livroi. That which we do on the outside by the mizbeach hachitzon. If I shecht the animal out there, if I do the zrikas adam there, then I have to bring the blood inside for the shiraim legavoy, and the opposite is also true, udegavoy livroi. And that which we do inside the zrikas adam has to go outside. That can't be. Ha'ein lo yisod lepnimi atzmo. There is no yisod on the mizbeach ha'pnimi. It's a klotz kasha. The whole thing is a zero. It's a house of cards. How could you possibly even suggest that? Of course, that's not true. So then the Gemara says, "Oh, eino ela mizbeach shel ola yeheli yisod." Turning to the top of Nun Beis Amud Aleph. Maybe it should be like we suggested in our Mishnah that perhaps we're only talking about the Korban Ola and only its blood gets put on the Mizbeach and no other Korbanos are required. Says the Gemara, no, Michsiv El Yisod HaOla. Absolutely not. It doesn't say the Yisod of the Korban Ola. It says El Yisod Mizbeach Ola, the Mizbeach of the Ola. That's how we refer to the Mizbeach, but we're talking about all Korbanos. Says the Gemara, Ihava Ksiv El Yisod HaOla. If it would have said the language in the pasuk of Yisod HaOla without the word Mizbeach, Hava Amina Bizakifa El Yisod. I might have made a mistake. I might have put the blood on the face of the Amma. Let's just get this clear. If you have a Mizbeach, right here, you have a wall. The Amma was, let's say you have the wall here. The Amma was an Amma here. The Yisod was this square that was added at the bottom of the Mizbeach. So the Gemara says that in this square, I might have thought that you can do the face of it. That's not the right place. It has to be on top, on the gag. It has to be on the top part of the Yisod not on the side facing part of the yesod. That's what the Gemara says. Without the word mizbeach, havamina bizkifa el yesod, that you could have put the blood on the face of the yesod. That's not true. Hashta dechsiv el yesod mizbach ola agago the yesod. It's talking about the top of the yesod. So that's how we learn up the psukim to make sure that we can maintain all three of our original drashos. Then the Gemara brings back our conversation about Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Even this is difficult to understand, even though it's going to try and explain it, because the language that Rabbi Akiva used was so slightly different than the language of Rabbi Shmuel. But nevertheless, here's how the Gemara explains it. We're on Nun Beis and Aleph, about 8 lines down. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, Gag Yesod Lama Likra. I don't need a pasuk of El Yesod Mizbach Ha'ola to teach me that the blood goes on the top of the Yesod and not the face of the Yesod. I know that already. Because Rabbi Shmuel says, Kal v'chomer hu. Here's my Kal v'chomer. Uma shiur chatas, when it comes to the extra blood of a chatas, she'ena mechaperes, you already did the chatas, the zrikas adam is done. So now you're she'ena mechaperes to una gag Yesod. And says the Gemara that there, where there's no kapara, we still require the blood to be put on the top part of the yesod and not the face, vertical part of the yesod. Well, tchilas ola, by the zrikas hadam of the ola shemechaperes eino din sheteuna gagli yesod. Obviously, where there is kapara, we're going to have to use the top of the yesod and not the face of the yesod. And then Amar Rabbi Akiva, yeah, I agree with you, but I'm going to give you a gentle distinction in language. When it comes to the shiur hadam, which is not mechaper because you did the zrikas hadam, not only is it not mechaper, ve'ein bain lechaper, that wasn't even the goal. These are the added words of Rabbi Akiva. So there to unagag yesod, techilas ola shemechaperes uva lechaper. The goal of the ola was to be mechaper on mitzvos aseh and lavanitak lases. In other cases, eino din shetuna yesod, shetuna gag yesod. Obviously, it needs to be that way. So therefore, the pasuk of mizbach ola can't be for what you said. Elamai in kain matam lomar yesod mizbach ola. It must be tein yesod the mizbach shel ola. It therefore comes to teach us that. Obviously, that last pasuk of El Yesod Mizbach Ola was there to teach us, not like you wanted to say, to teach me about only the Ola, but because of the fact that we have these Kal V'chomers, and therefore the word Mizbach needs to still be darshaned, so we darshan it like the Brisa said at the bottom of Nun Aleph, Amid Aleph, that what? That all of the blood needs to be put on the Mizbach Ola of all animals. Good. Asks the Gemara, we're just a few more lines for tonight, 5 more lines, and then we'll stop. My beinayu, what is the difference between the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel's Kal V'chomer and Rabbi Akiva's Kal V'chomer? So to this, the Gemara says, Amar of Ada bar Ava, Shirayim me'akven ika beinayu, whether or not the Shirayim are actually required. According to some of the Meforshim, it doesn't actually mean what the word me'akven literally means, that you're not yotze the korban without it. We learned that in the fnai v'lifnim, even just lifnim, that is me'akev, but in general that's not true. This language of me'akven doesn't mean that you're not yotze. It just means that it's a requirement, and if you don't do it, you don't do it. So not a good language to use in this Gemara because it's not a very specific language. Nevertheless, the Gemara says that's the difference between the Mar Savar, according to Rabbi Shmuel, Me'akve, the Shirayim are required. Umar Savar, Rabbi Akiva holds, Lo Me'akve. That's answer number 1 of Rav Ada bar Ava. And the Gemara says, and we'll close with this Shita, Rav Papa Omar, Dekule Alma Shiraim Ein Me'akve, everyone agrees that Shiraim is not a requirement. We're only talking about squeezing the blood out of the neck of a bird after Malika. That is what they're arguing about. Mar Savar Ma'akev, Rabbi Shmuel was of the opinion that it is Ma'akev, and therefore you're obligated to do so. Umar Savar Lo Ma'akev, that you are not obligated to extend that blood of the animal from the bird, the neck, onto the Mizbeach again, and that is his Shita. So these two Kal V'chomers, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, are extremely similar to one another, and the difference between them is either, according to Rav Ada bar Ava, whether or not the Shirayim are a requirement, and according to Rav Papa, whether or not Mitzui Chatas Ha'of is a requirement. We'll stop right here. As you can see, halfway down, it starts with Tanya Kavasi de Rav Papa. We'll pick up right there in Mirz Hashem tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.